Was the 8-hour, 5-day work week a mistake? Is criticizing old senators ageist? And why are Christians so insecure that they wear crosses in public? We look at these questions and more on this episode of Good Take, Bad Take. Hey friends, welcome to this episode of Good Take, Bad Take. My name is Donald, and I'm not here with my co-host Britt because he is on a little bit of a break as he and his wife just had their first child. Everything is good and healthy there, so we're very happy and excited for them, but he's not joining me for a little bit just to give him a chance to catch up on sleep, which is very needed. So with that being said, just before we get into the episode, we just encourage you to follow, like, subscribe, all that good stuff. Really helps us out a ton. Our handles are Good Take, Bad Take Pod on Instagram and Good Bad Take Pod on Twitter and YouTube. Without further ado, let's get into the first take. This one is a meme that shows an image of Henry Ford with the caption, September 25th, 1926. Henry Ford announces the 8-hour, 5-day work week. Everyone boo this man. So this is, of course, a very silly post. The idea that somehow Henry Ford introducing the 5-day work week, the 8-hour, 5-day work week, was a bad thing would be laughed at if you went back to this time. I think the idea of this meme would be to say that, oh, we need to boo him because he's, somehow regimented our life and work schedules into this onerous system that's so laborious for us and burdensome. But the reality is that prior to this, work schedules were a lot more brutal and a lot longer usually. And of course, that makes sense. As we progress and we develop and advance as a society and as humans, as we interact with the world around us and become more advanced and modernized and efficient, then we can afford to take breaks and we can afford to regiment our schedules in such a way. When Henry Ford introduced this, it wasn't a demand of, all right, now all my workers have to do this. This was a benefit, right? A voluntary introduction into the market where Henry Ford said, I'm going to make my place attractive for people who are efficient and good. And he obviously invented the assembly line. And then he said, great, so if you come work for me, you're only going to have to work 5 days a week, and it's only going to be for 8 hours a day. And again, that was absolutely unheard of in the sense that that was not standard. It was not regimented. So there's a lot of levels in which this meme is ridiculous. The first of all being, of course, seeing this as a bad thing. If nothing else, even if you believe that this is a terrible system for today's economy, which you can make individual arguments maybe on a case-by-case basis, but even if you think this is burdensome in today, you have to recognize where you're coming from, that this would be a progress towards a more light, a more living your life at home kind of schedule in many ways. Now, of course, you could contrast this with homesteading and where families spent all of their time at home because their livelihood was on their farm. But I think that that's a separate conversation, right? Because of the industrial world in which Henry Ford lived, it wasn't a choice between come into the factory and work 5 days and 8 hours versus staying at home and living your life that way. It was, work in this factory long hours and many days a week. Maybe you wouldn't get your mandated break if you had to go overtime, kind of a thing, or you could come work for Ford and he guaranteed the sort of 8-hour 5 work days schedule, which would be great. And of course, the other silly thing to boo this is that this was one man introducing this into his business. It was not a government mandate. If anything, the post lamenting this should criticize the legislation that made that the standard default. And I think that that's where you start getting ridiculous with laws that require overtime pay and things like that, because every job is different and different employers should be able to freely offer different benefits. I mean, you think about also the messed up place our insurance system is in, and you realize that once again, this is a function of government interfering with marketplaces, because the government said that during World War II, companies couldn't offer their employees certain number of payments or a certain higher threshold of pay. And so they started offering other benefits that were equivalent to pay increases in order to attract talent. And that's where you started getting things like your work starts paying for your health insurance and things like that. And then the government comes in and ties them together and says, okay, now as a job, you legally have to provide that if people work over a certain amount of time. And now you end up with this really bad system where it's not a market economy, but it's the worst parts of the market economy mixed with government control. So in the same way, if you're complaining about the 8-hour 5-day work week, you should really be complaining about the government interfering and making that mandatory for most businesses to offer, and making that the standard rather than it being introduced as a competitive bonus and something that companies voluntarily adopt. I think I think there's a great case to be made that not every job ought to be 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. I think there's lots of jobs for people who are self-employed where they'll work very long hours for a couple days and then take extended breaks, and that works for them. But there are certain jobs that you need more constant, more consistent shifts in. I think it's a case by case basis, and Henry Ford introducing this as a workplace perk was the best implementation possible, because if you wanted this, you could go for it. Not only was it a benefit, compared to the rest of the working conditions and hours of his time, but it was completely voluntary. No one had to do this because you didn't have to work for Ford. You could work for someone else who didn't implement it. But now, of course, it's mandated, it's mandatory. People have to stick to it in such a way that because it's this standard set by the government, rather than allowing innovators to offer different packages and time payments and things like that. When there's less flexibility in the market, you get less innovation for better things moving on. And so the government forcing everyone into sort of this model and say, oh, this worked here, let's make it mandatory for everyone, I think it stifles a lot of creativity and a lot of freedom and expression within the workplace and employers what they want to offer. So all this to say, lamenting this as a bad move and booing Henry Ford is very silly for a number of reasons. And so this is quite a bad take. All right, our next take here. This was from, I think it was a page on Facebook called like Trump Republicans or something like that. And they post, a dog had his chain reduced one link at a time every few days until his chain was so short he could barely move. He never resisted because he was conditioned to the loss of his freedom slowly over time. Now, I like this take. I mean, it's a little simplistic and a little, I don't know, parable-y for my taste, but the message is good. I think the funny thing is that the recognition of the chain being reduced one link at a time, to me, the irony of this is that while it's a good take, I think that Republicans generally still want the chain to be on. And I think that says a lot about the condition of people. I don't think humans should be akin to dogs. I don't think we should be chained up. Now, are there people who ought to be restrained? Sure, but that shouldn't be your default state. That shouldn't be the as I enter into society, I come, with this obligation, this chain tying me down until proven otherwise. I think that we have to, work towards a society where we restrain people who violate the freedoms of others. And so that kind of made me laugh. But I do think that this is right, where a lot of people decry the idea of incrementalism, especially in the liberty world. A lot of people who I like and agree with, they sort of poo-poo the move towards one step at a time reducing infringements on liberty, or like marginally reducing a tax rate. And I think that there's several angles to this, but first and foremost, I'm an advocate for any incremental move you can make to restore those links, even if it's not destroying the chain. I think ultimately, let's break the chain. Let's destroy the chain. Let's not try to move the marginal tax rate from 9% to 8%. Let's move it so that we don't have the income tax, right? But I'm also not going to say let's not work towards reducing that and restore link chain by chain just because the chain exists. I think we ought to work towards a better everything in all. And the thing is, a lot of people talk about how this is, divide of resources, or it can be counterproductive. And so I don't think that you should do things in a way that is cynical, or a way that is counterproductive in the long run. For instance, to say, everything has trade-offs, and so you have to kind of balance those trade-offs. So yeah, if all of your progress is going in towards reducing your income tax rate by 1%, like, yeah, it's a good move. But if it's worth, expending all your political capital and working the whole year to get in that 1%, and then you let 5 other, infringements of liberty go in on that time, then I understand the argument that it is a waste of time. But I think that there's actually a lot of effective institutions and a lot of effective groups that help keep the ideas of liberty even remotely alive. As much as I don't think the Constitution itself can protect liberty, the ideas in the Constitution are helpful to protecting liberty. And that's why I think it's worthwhile that there are organizations that hold legal challenges to, stop flagrant abuse of laws that violate the Constitution in ways that would further impinge on and infringe on liberty. But I don't think that it's the end all be all answer. But I also think that this is, of course, where the left has so handily crushed freedom in many ways, is they've won these incremental battles bit by bit. And I think a lot of leaders of conservatism haven't been effective at stopping those incremental moves, and in many ways their incremental wins have made incremental concessions to the point that they were more crucial concessions being made than wins they got, and we end up where the links are being broken one by one, and we're being reduced into a much more tethered reality than we otherwise would be. So all that to say, yes, we need to be wary of incremental progress and incremental wearing down, and you have to be diligent to protect even the little small battles. And I think sometimes protecting the small battles does happen by incremental progress in the other direction. But ultimately, I think we also have to recognize that it's not enough to just want to restore the chain to full length, because you're still tied up at the end of the day. I think we need to get the chain long enough that we can start talking about destroying the chain. And part of that means shifting the Overton window in the public discourse to recognizing that the ideas of liberty and freedom are not as radical. They're not fascist. They're not white supremacist or whatever name calling the left wants to do. And they're trying to close the Overton window. They're trying to move it to the left. I think we broaden it, we widen it, we allow all discourse, and let people see that freedom actually works. And once we've got that sort of incremental progress back in that direction, I think it makes the bigger kinds of change a lot more feasible in the long run. So I'm a yes and kind of person in this regard, but I do think that if you're too focused on the incremental, then you do miss out on the bigger picture sometimes. Okay, this next post is a comment on a meme. So the original meme was shared on Facebook, but it comes from Twitter, from depths of Wikipedia, and this is in the wake of Senator Dianne Feinstein from California, she just passed away. And so this meme tweets, starting a list of things that are younger than Dianne Feinstein, with an image from Wikipedia of the chocolate chip cookie, which was invented in 1938, which is officially after Dianne Feinstein was born. So they're kind of just laughing at this thing that we've all known our whole lives is younger than this senator. And so there's a comment from someone reading, and I'm totally going to mispronounce this profession, and I apologize for that. But regardless, the quote is, so I'm a gerontologist, and I hear a lot of ageism directed at older policymakers on Capitol Hill. However, the issue isn't their age. The issue is, number one, overrepresentation of older policymakers on the Hill, and number two, the extreme power and wealth hoarding done by these baby boomers and silent generation that make it next to impossible for younger generations to make any actual headway at the federal level. Edit. I'm not arguing with anyone who doesn't have a PhD at the end of their name on this issue. Okay, thanks, bye. So, I probably would have just rolled my eyes at this take and moved on, but the edit at the end just made me think, all right, you need to get taken down a peg. Let's start with the low-hanging fruit, which is this end. Anyone who doesn't have a PhD at the end of their name is an appeal to authority fallacy, and frankly just the most absurd one to make in a post-COVID world where the experts were wrong on absolutely almost every mark, where they lied and deceived. A PhD does not mean you are correct. It can give you credibility for sure, but these days maybe not so much, but generally, having authority in an issue gives you credibility, but it doesn't mean you're right, and it's not in and of itself an argument to why something is right or wrong. So just saying I'm shutting out discourse with anyone who doesn't have a PhD on this, you're just highlighting your own ignorance. And I think it's very reasonable to say, I'm done arguing with this. Because when you're getting swarmed online, like, that's overwhelming. There's a lot of people who are just yelling at you and shouting, and you don't have an obligation to respond to any one of them. I get that. But to sort of out yourself as this elitist, you're complaining about ageism, and then you're saying, oh, if you don't have a PhD. I mean, I could come back and say, wow, I can't believe you're discriminating against people who don't have the financial resources to get a PhD. If I wanted to go a level further, it's like, wow, there are a lot of people whose learning and skills and intelligence doesn't communicate in the same way that other people's do when it comes to test taking and paper writing. Are you being, discriminatory against people whose skill sets aren't traditionally catered to in the education system of universities? There's so many things you can throw back at someone who's claiming ageism as an serious issue here, that when they start blatantly discriminating, and again, discriminating isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it's just very funny when they are complaining about discrimination and then in the next sentence discriminate. So it just makes her look very immature, and like you don't actually have an argument to hold. But to the core of the issue, um, the funny thing is she's saying, it's a lot of ageism, and the issues are overrepresentation of older policymakers on the Hill. That would be ageism, right? You're saying that statistically an age demographic is overrepresented, and that's a problem. But I mean, unless you can appeal to an argument that every generation ought to be equally represented, then you're making discriminations based on age, no matter what you do. And I think I'm not. I don't want to put words in her mouth, but I'm pretty sure she doesn't want Zoomers in Congress right now because none of them would be old enough. And I'm certainly sure she doesn't want Gen Alpha represented in Congress, even though there are lots of Gen Alpha, but they're all just young children. So the idea that you want you have overrepresentation of a particular generation, it's like, well, only within these legal bindings, but you're discriminating based on age and competency in that regard. Um, you know, unless you're saying that everyone is equally, totally capably represented once they reach a certain age threshold, and then you can divide it evenly from there, you're making discrimination one way or the other. So I think that's a little silly. And then two, the extreme power and wealth hoarding done by these baby boomers and silent gen that makes it impossible for younger generations to make headway at the federal level. All of these, again, to me, are very fair critiques to say this person is old, and therefore they're participating in those systems. I think that generally speaking, her arguments are the stronger ones to make. So you could say, for instance, Dianne Feinstein is old. It's like, well, that's not really the issue. More of the issue is that she's completely incapable of actually processing any information because she's at the age where she's not well. But also recognizing that, like, she's that old. For what it's worth, uh, people who are criticizing a lot of Dianne Feinstein's policies and things aren't criticizing for her age, right? Like, a lot of people are coming out and saying what a terrible person she's been and how much destruction she's brought through her time in Congress. But even if they were, there's a lot of things that get, that are being assumed when you say, oh, this person's like 90. A lot of, like, libertarians, for instance, would be like, yeah, we'd take Ron Paul in the Senate or in the House for sure, even though he's very old, and he's not as sharp as he once was, but he's actually much more healthy than a lot of people his age. So just claiming the age thing alone, it's like, yeah, sure, like, it's not like this person turned to this age, therefore they're automatically out. That's not usually the complaint. Usually saying this person's old, like very ancient, there's a lot of other things being assumed in there. Like, for instance, they've been in a government position their whole life. They're probably corrupt because they're not in touch with the normal person and the normal way of living for this generation. Also, their mental faculties probably aren't all there. I don't know. To me, it's just this seems like such a semantic issue to be making, where most of the people who are saying she's old, they're not just saying she's old and that's that. It's because she turned this age. There's a lot of other implications going on there. And so this complaint about ageism just feels very hollow. Feels like you're getting mad for the sake of being mad, rather than actually addressing the key complaints that people are making. And I don't know. To me, it just seems like we've invented all these outrage mechanisms in our culture and society without addressing the heart of the issue that people are bringing up and talking about. And so it just feels really silly and like you're taking a moral high ground, and especially with that ending line of "I'm not arguing anyone who doesn't have a PhD at the end of their name." Like, you're taking this high ground. You feel like you're making this great moral point when you've said very, very little. And maybe that's kind of the place where our culture is today when it comes to politics. Okay, our next tweet comes from this is so good. So that this is important for this. If you're not watching the video, I'm gonna spell out this person's username very specifically. So his username is Atheist Dad, telescope emoji, UK emoji, a science like looks like a molecule, symbol emoji. And I'm not sure what the other flag there emoji is, but Atheist Dad, and then he's got all these symbols. And then he has an image of a man wearing a crucifix or a cross necklace, and he tweets, "I don't wear anything that states my lack of belief. So why do Christians feel the need to tell the world their belief system?" And this is just a really, really funny take for a lot of reasons. There's like 500 million different ways you can sort of take this down and pick it apart. The first, of course, is that his name is Atheist Dad on Twitter. He's literally projecting his lack of belief in that username, and like he also in his username is projecting like a telescope, which is, isn't specifically to say it's a lack of belief, but that he's interested in science, that he's from the UK. He's projecting a lot of things that he does believe in through those emojis. He projects his lack of belief in his username. And he had a follow-up tweet that was something along the lines of like, well, people are pointing out my username, but I don't wear that on my shirt when I go out in public. But really, when you think about it, that to me is akin to someone saying, "Oh, freedom of speech only is for written letters, not typed digitally." It's like, yeah, the point of wearing a cross is to represent this symbol and be visible. And the point of your username being Atheist Dad, or even putting any of those emojis in your username, is for those to be seen in the public sphere, just albeit the digital one. Just because you think that there's a difference between you being able to put it out in public, if anything, it says more about your fear of confronting people in real life about your beliefs or being owned, and you're more willing to be put on a bold face behind a screen where people are relatively anonymous and you can run away and hide. So if anything, that just says to me that you're a coward if you're making that distinction. I would gladly wear a cross in public. I haven't tended to, but that's more been a fashion statement for my own self that I haven't felt like it would look good on me or something. But I have no problem with that, and I in my a lot of my bios I'll include something like Soli Deo Gloria, for the for the glory of God alone, to indicate that kind of thing. And he clearly feels similarly about doing things online as Atheist Dad, but somehow when it's a physical manifestation, he has a complete meltdown about this. The other thing I would say is, if you do want to split hairs here, I would argue that a lack of belief in something is inherently less energizing and less, it's going to drive less passion on average than an active belief in something. Now, clearly, Atheist Dad's whole shtick is that he's very passionate and that he doesn't believe in these things. But what I would say is that, when you're rooting for something or you believe in something, you do want to spread that along, and you do want to project that. And so, even asking, why do you feel the need to tell the world about their belief system? Even just from a basic sociological level, it makes sense that if you're excited about something, if you love something, you do want to share that. And frankly, saying that, oh, okay, so here's a good example. So if I'm like a Harry Potter fan, I might love that. I might want to identify with that. I might want to wear a scarf that has my house on it from Harry Potter, right? Like my Ravenclaw scarf. Then people see that, they identify, they know I'm passionate about that. Maybe they'll strike up a conversation about it, whatever. If I'm very anti Harry Potter, if I think Harry Potter is the most cringe thing in the world, I'm much less likely to wear a shirt that says Harry Potter is cringe on it, right? My enthusiasm for uh the lack of passion I have about that, it doesn't translate in the same way. There are a lot of things that I find cringe or not excited to be about or don't believe in, but there's a million things like that. people tend to want to be identified by what they are for, not everything you're against. So it doesn't make a lot of sense that you're making this complaint. It's a very normal and natural thing to want to identify, project, and promote the things that you do identify with rather than the things you don't. So from that level, it also makes sense why Atheist Dad wouldn't feel the need to wear anything that shares this lack of belief, and a Christian who has an active belief would. And then, of course, lastly, the most obvious one is anyone who knows like the most basic rudimentary understanding of the Christian faith knows that that's our core central mission. The Great Commission is what it's called, when Jesus tells Christians to go and spread his name, spread his gospel, and share the world, save the world through evangelization. So just showing, why do they feel the need? Because we're commanded. There's your answer. And so I don't know if this is just a basic troll bait post, or if Atheist Dad, you'd think, is having a lot of dialogue or engagement in trying to debunk things like Christianity. You would think he would have the most rudimentary understanding of what the motives and what the understanding of the thing he's trying to debunk is. But clearly that's not the case, or he's just trying to make a low-hanging fruit bait post, which is definitely possible. I had to check this account to make sure it wasn't just a troll account. And if it is, it's been going for a long time and it's been very sincere and authentic. So I don't think it's a troll account. If it is, my apologies, but also there are people like this out there. So maybe this is helpful to debunking and stuff. But it is disturbing to me. And I think that it's a very easy thing to do in dialogue and in discourse when you have a belief system and you hold to in particular when there's an identity issue with it, right? Not just something you happen to believe. Like, I happen to believe the world is globe and is not flat, or I happen to believe, for instance, that, I don't know, chocolate cake is generally better than vanilla. But in particular, those things don't really shape my identity. But things that you generally identify with, that have a deeper identitarian connection with, those things, when we're arguing against viewpoints that clash with those, it's very, very easy to not do your full due diligence and investigating the deepest beliefs of the opposing system. And I think it's really easy then for you to make a claim like, why would Christians feel the need to share their beliefs, without having the faintest clue that is the central core command that Christians are given. You know, love your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Love your neighbor as yourself, and save evangelize the world, spread the gospel. Those are kind of the core commands. If you had to boil down, the actions of what a Christian what Christian living should look like. And so it's very easy then for someone to not do any investigation because you're worried. I don't know if you're worried about changing your mind, or you just don't want to have it sort of be palatable. It is difficult to do, and I recognize that, but we also live in an age where it's the most accessible and easy to do this more than any before. There are a couple ways that I try to do this in my own views in life. I was listening to audiobooks by Noam Chomsky for a while, and it was a frustrating thing. It was when I was commuting into my office, and I was listening to an audiobook of it, and I remember I was like stuck in traffic, and I'm almost like yelling in the car, like no, you're conflating capitalism with like foreign government intervention with foreign affairs and things, and like they're using mercantilist language to inform a foreign policy that we would disagree with, that has nothing to do with capitalism, me yelling, kind of a thing. And so I understand that it can be aggravating to engage with the deep ideas of ideologies that fundamentally disagree with where you are. But I think that it's also important because you have to explore those in order to have a better understanding. And there are plenty of times when I've engaged with ideas I've disagreed with, only to come out that maybe I agree with them more than I thought, and maybe I've changed my mind on that. And that's also a scary thing. And there are times, I'm not Catholic, but I've read into history and tried to grapple with the ideas of Catholicism, and there were times when I was toying, like, do I need to go down this route? Do I think it's true? And as it has happened, the more I've been reading history and theology and things like that, the less I've been inclined to that. But I also want to make sure that when I'm having dialogue with Catholics on things we disagree with, I'm representing them fairly, because I want them to represent my views fairly. I found that a lot of my views of things I believe get completely misrepresented in their circles, and then they keep believing what they believe, and no one would want to come over because the views are being misrepresented. So all that being said, we live in an age where doing that is so easy, and that's what kind of this post really, the hypocrisy and unawareness of that is the first thing that strikes you. But really, at its core, it's a fundamental misunderstanding of Christianity if you don't understand why Christian would want to project his beliefs publicly in the world like that. And it's, again, we're in the age where it's the easiest to do. It's like, if you don't want to read one book on your opposing viewpoint, there's probably 5 other you can find online, or clips or quotes. You can find interviews, you can find debates, you can find dialogues. There's so many resources with the exchange of ideas out there in this day and age. It's truly remarkable, and it's something that we should strive to do. So I hope I kind of doubt it, because I think this guy probably got blasted widely across the internet and dragged through the coals on this. But I do hope that he at least got someone explaining a better understanding of like why this would be the case. And I hope I've laid out some good reasons here as to why, Christians would want to wear a crucifix in public. Okay, our last post I had to throw in here comes from Britt Espinoza. And he posts, if you want eye bags like mine, you can get them by either 1, doing a tech startup, or 2, having a baby. I highly recommend number 2. Happy due date, Julia. So nice of you to join us early. And then it's a post of him holding his newborn daughter, who just has a full head of hair, which is just crazy. And she's adorable. And Britt does indeed have some sleep deprivation eye bags. But I'm sure they are happily earned. I've been chatting with Britt here and there, and the sleep deprivation is real, he said, but they're working on getting a schedule into the swing of things. So nothing really here. Just, this is a good post. It's a wholesome post. Tech startups are cool and they're good, but having a baby and having a family is probably the most fulfilling thing you can do in this life. And so really, really happy for him. And hopefully we'll get to see Britt soon, but until then, it's going to be just me riding here. So I have no idea when Brett will feel rested up. I guess we'll leave Julia to dictate our schedule there. But anyway, that's it for this episode. Thanks so much for tuning in. We really appreciate y'all, and I'll catch you on the next one.